Here we are in week 2, and of course, we are encountering that contrary state of the human soul known as experience, known to Blake as such. Here's S. Foster Damon, a Blake dictionary. He talks about innocence and experience, I think, in slightly simplistic terms, but you got to start somewhere, right? So, innocence and experience, as the full title of Songs of Innocence and Experience indicates, are two contrary states of the human soul. And he names these two contraries: ecstasy and misery, or heaven and hell. That's a part I wonder about. Because he seems to, let me just say in passing quickly, that experience I do not believe is to be dismissed as a condition of hellishness from which we should flee back into our innocent view of the world. Okay? I think he sees it as dialectically, as a kind of, right, as a kind of condition that one enters after being in the condition of innocence that represents, yes, a fall, but also something gained. Okay? Worldly wisdom, what have you, could be gained by way of this entry into experience. So it's not always going to be a bad thing to find yourself in a condition of experience. And you see this in a poem such as The Second Chimney Sweeper. We'll be talking about that down the road here a little bit. But Damon goes on. Blake extended the meaning to the state of childhood, this condition of innocence, of course, into which you are all born, a state of free imagination and spontaneous joy. Experience, on the other hand, is Blake's term for the contrary of innocence. It is man's state when disaster has destroyed the initial bliss. Okay? And what we want to do here in this video is talk a little bit about this disaster that proved so destructive. And we'll work our way towards, I think, a sharper sense of exactly in what the disaster consists. Okay, on our way to a sharper sense of that disaster, okay, that disaster that befalls folks as they enter into experience, okay, and it's a disaster they can resist, as we will find out, but that so many do not, right? As a first step in the direction of an illumination of what Blake is talking about, let's get into this definition of experience a little further, okay? An experience that innocent state of free imagination and spontaneous joy, right? That's as Damon defines innocence, as a state of free imagination and spontaneous joy. Okay, that state is more or less destroyed, canceled, or what have you, right? That innocent state of free imagination, spontaneous joy, and we might add a physical, sensuous, even sensual delight in the world, engagement in the world that's very passionate and delightful, right? All of that is canceled. Imagination is no longer free but constrained. We're going to see that's a very crucial part of this definition of experience, as we're going to find very shortly. Joy is mediated or chartered when it is allowed at all. Only certain species of joy are allowed to you any longer, and it's not anything spontaneous about it, right? An experience becomes something to fear. The world, right, is not something we plunge into in prospects of delight, but something to be feared and evaded. A great example of this is, of course, in The Sick Rose, right? The world around us, when we have fallen into the world of experience, when we've acquired a lot of experience and we've become jaded and warped by such experience, okay, the world itself changes. Our sense of it changes, really. The world objectively does not change, but our subjective sense of the world changes. The world around us becomes essentially, this is so well captured in the poem, The Sick Rose, a howling storm, which contains a threat, okay? One, the threat being the scarier because it's invisible. It's kind of subtle. You're not sure exactly what it looks like, but you know it's out there. You know, it's a boogeyman, right? Or the boogie worm. Here, the sickness of the rose is not corporeal, physical, but mental, of the mind. That is such a crucial point that we have to make, and that I'll be harping on throughout this video. The rose's problem is that right, she imagines this world, or this is the world that she imagines that she lives in. She feels that she lives in a dangerous world in which nasty, more or less satanic things are flying around, subtly trying to get to her, right? The rose, how it's sick, the invisible worm that flies in the night in the howling storm, right? She sees this she senses there's some sort of worm out there that's gonna fly up and kind of kind of creep in to her intimate spaces, right? The speaker here, I would argue, is the Bard of London, and also of the introduction, and I think of a number of other poems here in the Songs of Experience. And I think he's being pretty brutal, even sarcastic in this poem, right? Because there is no such worm. She's making it up, all right? This is just the world as she imagines it, as this nasty, scary place where she's going to be violated somehow when she feels she's safe in her quote-unquote bed. Somehow this very negative and very dangerous force is going to make its way in there and violate her in some way. It's all very vague, right? And that's part of the problem. So there is no such worm, except that, okay, and this is where the complexity of the poem really comes into its own. In a sense, there is a worm, okay, that has wormed its way into her soul or her heart, into that bed of crimson joy, which at this point becomes less of a sexual image. It obviously is that when we first encounter it, and that's what it is for her. I think she imagines that there's a sexual dimension to the violation that she fears, right? But for the bard, I believe the bed of crimson joy is her heart, which should have this joyousness about it. It is the very bed of such joys, right? It is the place in which such joys are given birth, and it is the place where such joys are almost as you might think of a garden bed, right? Which they're grown up and they're cultivated, as it were, right? He believes, the bard sees, right, that something has in fact gotten into that bed, but the one bed as opposed to the other one. In this case, the bed that we could refer to as the very heart of her imagination. If you can think about this, right? It's like this place of emotions and thoughts and feelings where you have these images of delight that come to you as you perhaps contemplate experience, the world of experience, but before you become polluted by experience, right? She has become polluted by experience, by this. She has become invaded by this fear, right? And so in her case, this worm is, as I'm putting it here, as I put it here in the document before you, it's a worm of fretful, fearful self-regard. That's the real worm, right? She fears this, objective, weird sort of sexual force out there that's going to get to her, right? And you could even say that literally she fears sexuality itself, because the worm there is a kind of phallic symbol, right? But I think that's a very simplistic reading of the poem to limit it to that, right? There's this second sense in which a worm has gotten to her, and I would argue it's wormed its way into her. And this is what the bard sees, and it's this, what we've been talking about throughout our discussion of this poem, this fretful, fearful self-regard, the dark, secret love that destroys. It's really self-love, right? It's the fear of experience as a fear that should you engage with the world, you'll be sure to lose something, or worse, pick something up, like a disease. That's the real worm that's gotten to her, right? And if that worm had not gotten to her, you could say that that worm getting to her is responsible. If it hadn't gotten to her, she never would have imagined this scary worm outside, right? She's sort of projecting this, this internal presence into the world and is kind of weirdly afraid of it. So there's something very interesting as a kind of psychological portrait here of agoraphobia and phobia experience of the world, of lots of stuff, pretty much everything. Fear, worry over what will happen to us, what's happening even now, subtly, invisibly. In Blake, fear is the root of all evil, fear arising out of selfish vanity, our foolish love for our little selves, our wish to preserve them inviolate. In Blake, it is very much a case that the only thing to fear is fear itself. What about the tiger? How does that illustrate this claim? Well, again, be aware that we have speakers in these poems, not all of whom are to be identified as Blakean and bardic. Some are, as it were, the timid, fearful rose, having found voice. Just imagine the rose speaking her own poem. It would be a very different poem. The speaker of the tiger is a good example, as Bloom argues, in the passage posted in the content drawer. I direct your attention to that. It's full of wonderful details as Bloom makes his way through the poem. Note how he, not Bloom, but the speaker of the poem, asks a series of increasingly fearful rhetorical questions. Below is the fifth stanza, okay? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the Lamb make thee? That's the fifth stanza. Note how here he, the speaker, appears to gesture back at the innocent speaker of the Lamb, as if to mock at him. That speaker, the speaker of the Lamb from Innocence, the song of Innocence that matches up so well, as a number of you said in your quiz responses, that matches up so well to this poem, The Tiger, that speaker was busy inferring things about God on the basis of one of his creations, the lamb. We've got this fluffy little lamb. We must have a fluffy, warm, fuzzy God, right? This one appears to mock at that very inferential act. And let's go back to something I had you read very early on in the semester, which was only last week. There is no natural religion. Okay, you cannot infer God's goodness or even his presence, even his existence, on the basis of the world he has supposedly created. That is Blake's claim. I won't work through his evidence for that claim in this moment, but that's his claim in that little piece, that little philosophical piece that I had you begin the semester by reading. And you see the point, if that's the point of this particular speaker. It's certainly the point of Blake and of Blake's bards, and Blake in his more prophetic, incarnation. If we're going to go by what exists, why not have a look at a tiger instead of a lamb? God all of a sudden would appear, when you look at the tiger, very threatening, hostile to human comfort. He, God, seems to thrive. And you see the he down below. Did he smile his work to see? Did God smile his work to see? Did the God who made the lamb make thee? Right? If we're going to go by what exists, why not have a look at the tiger? Right? And what do we see? But that this God who makes the tiger seems to thrive on human fear. He smiles at it. Here at the fearful discomposure of the very angels in heaven, who are no less scared of him, the maker of things like tigers, than are or should be humans, right? Should be if humans are God-fearing, right? If they're God-fearing enough, if they're God-fearing men, God-fearing women, they will be afraid of God. They will see that he's scary, right? Now, I wish I could say that the speaker of this poem was thus enlightened, but he's not, right? He's not really making fun of those angels who threw down their spears. He's one of them, especially in the sense of the angel or an angel that we encounter in the marriage of heaven and hell, where you'll hear the Blakean speaker, who is more or less an incarnation of Blake himself. As prophet, as bard, you'll see him encountering these angels and making fun of them, and kind of outwitting them and making fun of their conceptions of the world. I wish I could say that we had such a speaker of this poem. This poem, we don't. This poem is indeed going by what exists. He is a natural religionist. And note how the poem ends as we go on to the next plate. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what a mortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? You'll notice the emphasis upon the verb in the final line, dare frame. And that's because the first time we see this stanza, to the opening of the poem, here at the end we have the opening stanza echoed, and we see a different word there at the end, a different verb. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what a mortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? So could switches to dare by the end of the poem. That is what the speaker, the speaker of the song has learned, is that God is a lot scarier, morally speaking, than he thought he was. How dare God do such a thing? This occurs to him. How dare God do such a thing? Now, what I think we're going to see is that this is not an indication. When we look at some of the other songs that seem to link up nicely with this particular song, this particular poem, we're not going to see this as an indication that he's capable, really, the speaker, of getting outside of the religious framework that is a product of fear. And I'll explain this in our next stanza, our next play. Blake would say, I think, quote, would that the speaker of the tiger were so theologically confident in his own inferences. We'd like him better. I'd like him better, at least. Blake would like him better. He'd be making a mistake, but not one as bad as the one he will probably make just after allowing the truth of this song, his own song, to sink in. See, because it's a scary thing to think about the world and the God who made it. It's also a confusing thing. Indeed, did the God who made the lamb make the tiger? You know, sometimes lambs win. You see how confusing it is. They get away. They live their own sweet, fluffy lives, independent of these fierce tigers. Nice guys do finish first sometimes. So what's God up to? What's the plan? Or is it all just a mystery? Right? Well, Blake's answer is, as we're going to see, as we take up this poem I've been promising to talk about from the beginning of our semester, The Human Abstract. Blake's response is something along these lines, as he once wrote in this little quip. Come hither, boy, what dost thou see there? I see a fool tangled in a religious snare. The fool so tangled is self-entangled. That's Blake's point in The Human Abstract. Drop to the opening of the third stanza. Quote, he sits down with holy fears. This is very much the he, this he who sits down, who speaks the tiger. The song he has just sung, the tiger, it's sunk in. He's had a holy fear. What if God is truly the being who made the tiger and who made us lambs, just as food for such tigers? But he cannot accept, the speaker here cannot accept such a thought. The speaker of the tiger, now having carried over into this song, which he's singing subsequent to the tiger, he can't accept the thought that he has at the end of the previous poem. So he's stuck. He's full of scary doubts. And they make him want to sit down and try to think it out, or at least find a way to accept it. This is the crucial moment when he sits. The moral of the story is, I'll be harping on this, is don't sit down. He's afraid. He starts crying. Note crucially what happens next. Very crucial. All those tears and fears give rise to something. The imagination in Blake never shuts off. It never shuts down. We're always imagining. We're always imagining the world that we occupy. So in this moment, when he's retreated from experience and has begun, wallowing in his misery, he's sat down, he's crying, he's thinking, he's trying to figure it out, or maybe not trying to figure it out anymore. All those tears and fears give rise to something. He begins to imagine the world anew, the one that fits with, this new condition. This new condition seems to give rise to it. He begins to imagine the world anew, and more humbly. Humility takes its root, right? Maybe we just can't figure it out, right? Maybe the world is such that we can't. God's ways are mysterious to man, something like that. Blake doesn't like that notion at all. Humility takes its root, you will notice, and does so underneath his feet, which I think suggests that it will tangle him up and snare him, and he won't be able to walk abroad. Do you see how he becomes the subject of his own image of the world, the captive of his own conception of the world, which is that it is not something that we mere humans can presume to understand. And henceforth he will live minimally, to the extent that he lives. He'll live as a rather sedentary existence. He's just sitting there in the world that he has himself created. We see the process here, the end of which is a tree of mystery under which he will live, inactive, sedentary, missing out on experience. And this isn't good. Bad things, things like the worm and the sick rose, live in and on that tree. So it isn't just a matter of missing out. It's not just FOMA. There's something very nasty that has been created by way of this process of retreat from experience. Turning to the disc board from last week, and I will often be doing this, I'll be going back to disc boards from the week before. From last week, week 1, Q1, the first question I asked. For Wordsworth, then, inwardly we've lost something. Remember this one. And something good. For Blake, inwardly, mentally, we've gained something and something bad, something harmful. The term gain, usually suggesting a benign augmentation. We talk about gains. So this is a good thing. Maybe we should use the word, in this case, the word acquire. And think of how we use the term medically to speak of getting ill, acquiring a disease. Challenge, that was the charge. And does not Blake diagnose a more difficult condition to remedy than does Wordsworth? One in which we have to do more than find something we lost, as in Wordsworth, but we have to, in addition, get rid of something imposed upon us. Self-imposed, rather, as we have seen, the manacles being mind-forged, the tree of mystery growing up beneath our feet, the product of our own human brains. Well, several nice challenges were offered. Taylor, Bray, Elizabeth, and Sarah responded to this discussion board item. And one of you wrote, Blake and Wordsworth agree that London has lost something. Blake says, marks of weakness, marks of woe, which tells the reader that the people of London have lost their strength and happiness. Accordingly, each poet calls for renewal, Blake by revealing the chains and Wordsworth by invoking Milton's lost innocence. Moreover, another point of commonality, Wordsworth's England is a fen of stagnant waters, which reminds us of Blake in that it is not mere absence, this condition, this situation, but a present miasma, right, that we face, through which altar, sword, and pen, institutions of religion, power, and culture, have, quote, forfeited their ancient dower of inward happiness. All good. Blake would like the image of the fen, I think, and which could remind us of the howling storm of the dismal shade that we've seen in a couple of the previous poems that we've addressed on this in this video. Wordsworth, as one of you wrote, recognizes the city holds dark truths, dark duties, ones which get in our ways, hampering us. Okay, but there is a difference, it seems to me. The difference is that Blake imagines a rootedness or embeddedness. Again, go back to the imagery that we find in those poems that we have just discussed. You know, the sick rose in the case of the embeddedness, or in the case of the rootedness, the human abstract, right? The difference is that Blake imagines a rootedness, an embeddedness of the problem thereof that we do not find in Wordsworth's metaphors or symbols. Blake's sense of the disaster, that word makes its return finally, is such that mental fight will be necessary to free us from what thereby ensues. Bad religious notions, that religious snare we talked about before, cannot be simply shrugged off. They have us in their grip. So the insight to take away from this is that for Blake, the imagination is irrepressible. It's always at work and at play, making the world, even at times when stunted by bad religion, for the worse. Wordsworth, he doesn't really take a position on that issue, I would argue. Yeah, the poem that I would like to call to your attention briefly is one that I didn't actually assign last time, but it was in all those materials gathered for the week. And it's a poem called Jerusalem. He wrote a very long poem called Jerusalem, and this is the little lyric that was once placed in front of a long poem called Milton. And it's the one that was turned into a song, and I included some song renditions of it, one of which was sung at the Olympics, and one of I think this is the final stanza. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand till we've built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. And we've gotten rid of the miasmas. We dispelled the miasmas. We've thrown off the chains, right? And you see this distinction here is that it's going to take a fight to get it done. Now, it's figurative. It's mental. It's a mental fight. But it's going to take this extreme act or certainly a very substantial act of opposition to what is preventing us, okay, from entering into Jerusalem. And I think that's going to require an uprooting, a disembedding that is a much more dynamic requirement than anything we find in Wordsworth. Well, we'll be getting back to this distinction between Wordsworth and Blake when we get to Wordsworth, of course. The introduction to experience, you remember this, turn away no more, return. It's not going to be easy, but you do have the beauty of the natural world, the starry floor, the watery shore to give you footing, a toehold at least. You recall the scene from week 1, question number 2. I'll just read the final stanza. Turn away no more, why wilt thou turn away? The starry floor, the watery shore is given thee till the break of day. It's not going to be easy, though. Yeah, why not? Well, because somebody's in the way. We know this from the tiger. And this guy who's in the way, we tend to imagine him as a guy, kind of daddy, a big daddy up there in the sky. He's as bad or worse than some worm, right? Or even the tree which breeds the worm, as does the speaker of the tiger. In our paranoia, we imagine that there's a guy out there who is all-powerful and wants to keep us under his thumb. See, for example, Earth's answer, as some of you did. Elizabeth, starry jealousy has restricted Earth in expressing her love by keeping her locked in chains and darkness. She begs to be freed when she says, break this heavy chain. You see, the chain is, it's self-forged, right? It's mind-forged But we imagine that somebody else made it and put it on us. And thereby we disable ourselves. We make it that much more difficult for us to remove the chain, right? Earth imagines that she is stuck prisoned on watery shore because of starry jealousy. When Blake refers to free love, he means love that is not restrained or dim because of something or someone else. He's saying that love should feel like buds and blossoms growing. And indeed, we're getting into the whole question of love in Blake and free love, because that's the only kind of love that Blake thinks is worth having. Bridget, quote, for love to be chained and oppressed, Blake argues, is as unnatural as spring shying away from its own nature, which is very well said. And the only way for love to truly thrive is to be natural and free. Boy, wait till next week, right? You got some good reading ahead of you along these lines. Anna wrote, quote, the sowing of seeds, see lines 18 to 20, the business about the plowman, right? Does the sower sow by night, or the plowman in darkness plow? Right? We'll get into details of what that might mean. Anna gets into those details next time. But one thing is for sure, they seem to be alluding to sex, which was and still is a taboo or hidden topic. Indeed, Blake is talking about physical love, sex, not mere platonic love, as we will see very soon, because indeed there's much more in free love in Blake coming this coming week. So enough for this video for this week, and I will talk to you again in about a week. Have a great week. Good luck on the quiz, which is due Saturday night tonight.